Welcome, everyone. We're pleased to welcome back folks who've been to some of our other webinars and, of course, to welcome newcomers. Um, we're going to begin this presentation and tonight's proceedings with a land acknowledgement. Maybe we'll get LA to just push that slide.
There we go.
Great. So many of us, particularly the project team, we come to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Wolastoqey and Maliseet people. And their ancestors, along with the Mi'kmaq and Passamaquoddy, signed peace and friendship treaties with the British Crown in the 1700s. We know, however, that there are many of us on this call that come from all over Turtle Island. And so we use this as an opportunity to encourage you to reflect on the traditional territory you might find yourself on, and more importantly, the use of that land, as well as the work that we all have to do to bring reality to the promise of truth and reconciliation. So tonight's program, I'll begin by providing just a very brief introduction to the project that serves as the base or host for these webinar sessions, and introduce the project team. But then we're going to get into our main matter of business tonight, which is a presentation on the Journey project from Janet Lee, which promises to be very engaging. And even more engaging than that, I expect, will be our panelists and some of the Q&A that we can get from our audience members. So we are hoping for some good engagement on what promises to be a good presentation. So this project has been a 3-year initiative that has created 5 regional communities of practice. It's funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada, and in alliance with other 5 research centers on gender-based violence across Canada, we've created these groups of experts and stakeholders, all of whom play a part in the experience that survivors of family violence have moving through family court systems. So the goal has been to create these groups of experts to talk about what those experiences are like, what's working, what isn't, and on the ground best practices for what we can all be doing to sort of improve these experiences and remove those obstacles. This has sort of come out of an observation in research and among survivors themselves that one of the biggest obstacles they encounter is that silo approach that so many different community organizations, academics, family law practitioners, social services, all of those various sectors that they have to navigate and negotiate as they move through family court systems, that they tend not to talk to one another all that well or collaborate that easily. And so the project's aim has been to try to break down that siloed approach to addressing family violence in the family court system. So I serve as the principal investigator for the team. My colleague Ellie Henry acts as the project coordinator. We do this with the collaboration of the Muriel McQueen Ferguson Center for Family Violence Research under the direction of Kathy Holtman. And I have an invaluable research assistant, Ashley Thornton, who keeps me honest and keeps me on track in terms of publication of our research briefs. We also couldn't do this, of course, without so many of our stakeholders and our community of practice members, many of whom are here tonight. And even more exciting is that we have members of communities of practice from across Canada. So we are starting to see some of that collaborative approach that's been at the heart of the project's aim. Enough about us. However, it's really my pleasure to introduce you to Janet Lee. She serves as a legal support navigator for the Journey project in Newfoundland. And you can see here on the slide, we've highlighted some of her background, which includes a diploma in child and youth care from Eastern College and a bachelor in English, as well as a bachelor in social work from Memorial and the University of Manitoba, respectively. She has extensive experience in community organization, residential care, and alternative education programs, more than 15 years in those fields. And a particular focus she's placed on supporting survivors of sexual violence, beginning first in the Newfoundland Sexual Assault Crisis and Prevention Center, and then transitioning to the Journey Project in 2018. And it's really that Journey Project that's going to serve as the crux of her discussion tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Janet. Really looking forward to hearing what she has to say.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome and introduction, and to everyone on the call this evening. So just going to double check with tech support here that I am sharing the correct screen and we can see just a single slide as opposed to the presenter view.
Yep, looks good.
Great. Perfect. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. I am honored to be filling in for my colleague, Emma Duke, who is also a legal support navigator with the Journey Project. We're honored to be sharing both time and space with you all this evening. And I appreciate and recognize that we all might be joining tonight from different provinces and different territories. And so I want to take the opportunity to respectfully recognize that I'm joining you today as a settler on the island of Newfoundland, which encompasses the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and Beothuk people. And I'd also like to respectfully recognize the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatsiavut, as well as the Inuit of Nitassinan and their ancestors as the original people of Labrador. When we acknowledge the land, we also acknowledge that this land on which we learn and grow and live was taken without permission, it was taken without consent, and that gender-based violence, including sexualized violence, is disproportionately perpetrated against Indigenous peoples, especially Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit individuals. And this continues to be used as a tool of colonialism today, perpetrating the ongoing genocide of Indigenous peoples. And so as we move forward with our information and with our sharing this evening, thinking deeply about what it is that we can do to give back in this process of learning together. And so tonight I'm going to provide you with an overview of the Journey Project and the work that we do to support survivors of sexual violence and other forms of gender-based violence as people are navigating different legal systems. And we like to think about or offer resources and support when giving presentations about sexual violence because the conversations or thoughts during and information provided in this presentation may bring up different feelings for different people for many different reasons. And I recognize that the content of this discussion could prompt traumatic memories or complicated feelings. And so I encourage you all to do what you need to do to keep yourself as safe as possible. And we've included on this slide here a link to a page which lists supportive resources throughout Atlantic Canada. I will note that as a facilitator, I may have expertise. However, I do not consider myself an expert in anyone's lived experience. As one person on an incredible team of legal support navigators, we're people who have spent a lot of time thinking about, talking about, researching, and most importantly, supporting people who've been impacted by sexual violence and other forms of gender-based violence. But I truly believe that the individual is the expert in their own life and in their own unique experience. The people that we support are absolutely equipped with incredible creativity, resilience, strength, and knowledge. Throughout this presentation, I may use different language to encompass the wide breadth of experiences of the individuals we encounter who are navigating various legal systems. And we know, of course, that language holds a lot of power, and it's important to be mindful of the words that we use can carry a lot of weight and have a profound impact on a person who has experienced gender-based violence. So for example, within the legal system, we might hear a person be referred to as a victim, a witness, or a complainant. However, an individual may not necessarily identify with any of these words. Throughout this presentation, I use the word survivor. However, noting that there's, of course, the caveat that that word may not accurately reflect where someone is at in their healing journey. As was mentioned at the beginning, we are going to have time at the end for a Q&A. Please do feel free to put questions or comments in the chat box, as we anticipate that there will be time for answering of those at the end of our discussion following our panel. I am very excited to share space this evening with my colleagues, Sarah, Jen, and Jana. I will also note, both for the sake of the interpreters and for the folks joining us this evening, that I can sometimes have a tendency to speak a little too quickly. So I would not want LA or Carla or anyone else to jump in and remind me to slow down. If necessary, I can promise you that you will not be the first, 50th, or even 100th person to ask me to do so. And so we're going to have a specific focus this evening on the Journey Project Legal Support Service, where I'm going to focus or talk about different considerations that have come up for us specifically and more broadly when supporting survivors of gender-based violence. And then we're going to chat a little bit about some upcoming changes happening here at the Journey Project, where we anticipate being able to better support people who have been impacted by gender-based violence, who are thinking about their legal options, or may already be engaging with different legal systems. So what is the Journey Project? Who are we and what are we all about? So we began in 2017 and were formed as a collaborative initiative between two distinct nonprofit organizations, Public Legal Information Association of Newfoundland and Labrador, and the NL Sexual Assault Crisis and Prevention Center, or the Center. So Journey was established to strengthen supports for survivors who are navigating or thinking about navigating the legal system or multiple legal systems. For folks in other provinces or territories who may not be familiar with our founding organizations, CLEAN is an independent nonprofit organization that provides general information and education about the law to Newfoundlanders and Labradorians with the intent of increasing access to justice. It is the sole legal education provider in the province. The Center is the leading organization in the province that deals exclusively with sexual violence. The Center at its core works from a feminist-based, survivor-centered, and trauma-informed perspective, and offers both frontline supports and prevention initiatives to support survivors and address sexual violence at its root causes. And through Journey, while we support the mandates of both CLEAN and the Center, our primary focus is supporting survivors who are involved in or considering involvement in the legal system. We're responsible for delivering trauma-informed training and materials to legal stakeholders and other service providers to provide guidance on working with survivors of sexual violence throughout different legal systems. We offer support, outreach, and navigation, but what does that mean? So before we kind of get into the nuts and bolts of our services, it's first important to kind of define what I mean or what I'm talking about when I say sexual violence and the context from which we work. So sexual violence is a commonly used non-legal term that describes a continuum of aggression, abuse, or violence. And what we know to be true is that each survivor will experience sexual violence differently based on their own personal and unique experiences. And so the United Nations has defined sexual violence as any violence, physical or psychological, carried out through sexual means or by targeting sexuality. And while there are, of course, many common feelings, experiences, behaviors, and reactions to sexual violence, individuals are individual and they will respond individually. We know that sexual violence is about power and control and not sexual attraction or desire, and that perpetrators of sexualized violence are most often known to the person, such as an intimate partner, a parent, coworker, or friend. And so when we were developing the Journey Project, we really wanted to develop a support or a service that involves direct client-centered support for survivors that also encompassed outreach, training, and engagement where an inclusion lens was applied to all of the different components. So what I mean by this is accessibility needs, recognizing that, of course, sometimes accessibility can be about mobility issues, about childcare, about translation, about transportation, about interpretation, and that all of these things can potentially be barriers to accessing justice. Therefore, we are set up to, whenever possible, support folks with these needs. Our legal support service is the main arm of what we do. Within this program, we offer individualized case management and legal system navigation. So when requested by a survivor and when feasible, we as legal support navigators might provide accompaniments to the hospital, legal consultations, the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary, which is our provincial police force, or the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. We may accompany folks to court proceedings as well as other community programs and/or appointments. And we offer both legal and non-legal referrals. So we know that so many folks who have been impacted by gender-based violence are often interacting with many different systems, whether that be legal, health, housing, education, child protection, etc. And the individuals that we support may be experiencing multiple forms of oppression. And so we do our absolute best to facilitate connection, referrals, and support that are directly attached to the needs of the individual or individuals we are supporting. For folks who do want to speak to a lawyer or access legal advice, the Journey Project Legal Support Service can match them with a participating lawyer for free legal advice. Lawyers who are on our roster are paid for by the Journey Project through funding from Justice Canada. And we have lawyers who practice in areas such as criminal, civil, family, labor and employment, human rights, and privacy law, amongst others. When an individual reaches out to us, we have a short intake process where we work to determine or confirm eligibility. And from there, if they desire to do so, they are connected with a lawyer. In terms of our education, training, and information sessions, we have developed a suite of curricula on trauma-informed practice specifically for legal stakeholders. And this training has been delivered to every lawyer on our roster, as well as Crown attorneys, police officers, community partners, and other. We regularly travel throughout the province offering information sessions or community connection opportunities like craft nights, drop-in supports, free legal clinics, just to name a few. And members of the Journey Project team sit on various committees that are dedicated to, for example, civilian police oversight, sexual assault responses, and sexual harassment in the workplace. Currently, and you'll notice that there is an emphasis on current, we'll be revisiting that later in the presentation, the Journey Project Legal Support Service, our lawyer referral program, is available to people of any gender who've experienced sexual violence and who either currently live in Newfoundland and Labrador and or experience sexual violence in Newfoundland and Labrador. So what I mean by this is that folks can actually be living in another province or territory or even another country. If they experience sexual violence in Newfoundland and Labrador, they can access our services. And then the last piece I often refer to as thinking about legal options. And so noting that we are a completely voluntary, absolutely no pressure service, and that what we hope to do and what we're here to do is to provide accurate legal information, access to free legal advice, and ongoing support so that each survivor, each person who reaches out to us can make informed decisions about what they may or may not want to do next. So as an example, a survivor who now lives in New Brunswick but experienced sexual violence in Newfoundland and Labrador can avail of our program. A survivor who is currently over the age of 16 but experienced childhood sexual abuse can also avail of the program. We often say that, if folks aren't sure, they should absolutely reach out to us. There does not need to be any criminal charges laid. No one has to have reported to the police. No legal processes have to have even started. It really can be at the beginning or at any point of any legal process that folks reach out and connect with us. And so survivors who wish to access this service will first contact a legal support navigator. They can reach out to us through email, phone, text, social media, in person, all sorts of different options to reach out to us. The navigator will complete an intake form gathering basic information from the client before assessing and working with the individual's particular needs and experiences. A key and foundational value of this program is that it is survivor-centered. So we're going to work with individuals to determine the best course of action for that particular individual. and the individual will have choice absolutely every single step of the way. Because we know, and I'm sure that everyone on this call has experience with or knows, that the legal system can be incredibly adversarial, and many survivors report feeling confused, overwhelmed, or defeated before they even begin a legal process. So unlike an accused person, a survivor doesn't have a guaranteed right to a lawyer in the criminal legal system or access to legal aid for a criminal trial. And this can lead to a lot of uncertainty about where they fit in the process. Additionally, many survivors may not qualify for legal aid and cannot afford a lawyer, further stressing the need for access to legal support. Legal support navigation can help survivors make an informed choice before exploring the justice system or the legal system. It can help them choose the best option for their situation and can help them feel more empowered and less alone in the process. So sometimes knowing what legal support navigation is, like providing general legal information, supportive referrals, or a lawyer referral, and helping people navigate system is important. And it's also important for us to know or conceptualize in the context of the Journey Project what it is not. So as legal support navigators, we can't offer, in the context of this role, any counseling services. We ourselves do not provide the legal advice. We do referrals to practicing lawyers for legal advice, and we can't file complaints on behalf of people. And a question when we were first starting the Journey Project back in 2016, 2017, that would often kind of be posed is, well, why would a survivor need legal advice, particularly in the context of the criminal justice system? And so part of that can be, individualized information about what to expect within the legal system can help someone make an informed choice about their steps. Information about other legal options can help a survivor choose what is best for their particular situation. And we know that elements of the legal system can have a negative impact of survivors of sexualized violence and other forms of gender-based violence. Additionally, we know that a lot of us cannot necessarily afford to hire or to consult with a lawyer. And so Journey tries to kind of bridge that gap for folks as they are thinking about or navigating a legal process. And so through the Journey Project, clients have reached out requesting support and legal advice in a variety of areas of law. And I think to date, we've supported just over 450 survivors as they've been navigating or thinking about navigating the legal system. So they may have questions from criminal or civil law to employment or human rights complaints. And so it's important to recognize that individuals may have a number of different inquiries, which may or may not include the criminal justice system. We know when we look at stats related to reporting stats about how few folks folks who have experienced sexualized violence, do report to the police or move through that system. And there is a million valid reasons why some individuals will not want to pursue a criminal report or charges. And we here at the Journey Project absolutely support that choice. Some likely questions that clients may have about the criminal legal system might be things to consider when talking to the police, what to say or not say. We might have folks who have accessed our services who they themselves have been criminalized in different contexts, and what impact that might have on police response to filing a complaint. We've certainly had folks reach out with questions and looking for support on O'Connor applications, 276, 278 applications, questions about what's commonly referred to as the rape shield laws, and then questions in particular around whether an experience was a criminal code violation. This might include historical experiences of sexual violence. It might also include experiences of sexual harassment. Additionally, folks may have questions around what to do about historical experiences, particularly those that happened decades ago. Family law matters can become incredibly adversarial for survivors of gender-based violence in particular. And we know that many times the person who has caused harm can use the legal system to further maintain their power and their control over the survivor. This is especially true in intimate partner relationships where power is maintained through coercive and controlling behaviors. particularly notable when children are involved. Additionally, clients who may not have had any recourse in or may not be interested in pursuing the criminal justice system may still wish to explore other legal options. At the Journey Project, we're seeing this legal option be pursued more and more by survivors of sexual violence. And it's notable that many survivors report not wanting to engage with the criminal legal system at all because of how harmful it is, and instead look to civil options. Clients who are considering civil suits may likely need advice and or information on the possibility of a civil lawsuit, the likelihood of success related case law, information on how to interpret that, if there are relevant statutes of limitations that may or may not apply to their particular case, or what sort of damages to seek. Additionally, those who are exploring their options within the scope of labor and employment, say for example, or human rights law, say for example, someone who's experienced sexual harassment in the workplace or whose experiences of sexualized violence impact their work, may need support regarding a complaint under a workplace policy, whether a union may help, if there's a professional body that regulates members and has a complaints process, what options exist if one is sexually harassed at work or as part of the job, if there's a difference, if that harassment is perpetrated by an employer or an employee or perhaps a customer, is there a difference? And the possibility of a potential human rights complaint. And so noting that all of these different things can impact people in different ways. And so when supporting individuals who have experienced gender-based violence, there are several considerations that guide the work that we do at the Journey Project. When supporting individuals who have experienced any form of gender-based violence, whether that be sexual violence, intimate partner violence, or family violence, we strive to practice from a trauma-informed perspective. And so recognizing that when we're talking about trauma, we're talking about things that generally speaking were unexpected or responses to were unexpected, being unprepared for those experiences and unable to stop the trauma or the impacts of trauma from happening. So this can include, of course, recent single traumatic events like a car crash or a sexual assault. It might be something that happened in the past, or it can be a long-term chronic pattern or multiple events. For example, ongoing childhood neglect, sexual or physical abuse, or family violence. And we know how extensively trauma and traumatic incidents can impact all aspects of a person. And the ways that individuals respond to violence can also impact how they cope, how they move forward, and how they heal. We know that trauma can impact the entire family, and generations can feel the impact of that violence. Knowing how incredibly pervasive trauma is, as service providers, we must create space for safety, trust, collaboration, and choice when engaging with survivors, particularly as they navigate legal systems, which are often not set up to offer survivors much choice. There's often incredibly little or no choice, particularly within the criminal legal system or family law. So offering any opportunity for an individual to exercise their power and their control over their own lives is absolutely critical. And a big part that is often referenced about becoming trauma-informed involves shifting to a mindset which recognizes not only that trauma is pervasive, but that it affects people and their behaviors significantly. And so this has been summed up by other folks in a way that it's about working to change our approach from the what is wrong with you moment when we're seeing someone behave or act or speak in a particular way to that moment of what has happened to you. And this has been a touch point or cornerstone of the work at the Journey Project since its inception. Additionally, when it comes to collaboration, we collaborate with people we support in terms of meeting their unique needs and engaging meaningful, and we also collaborate with other service providers. One of the things that we've noticed over the last several years in particular, that so many of us are doing similar work and striving to support survivors the best way we can by sharing the same goals. And we can have a particular tendency to work in silos. And I think that a lot of us have experienced those silos become even a little bit more closed off through COVID. And that's one of the many reasons that I'm so grateful to be here with you all this evening, having this conversation and engaging with our partners in PEI and New Brunswick as we continue to move forward on all of our different journeys towards supporting survivors through legal support services. So to best meet the needs of survivors, we really need and want to be cultivating and maintaining collaborative partnerships with other services working to meet the needs of service users and the needs that are defined by those service users. So this might include cross-agency program facilitation, co-location of services, cross-agency training initiatives. This might be at the community level, provincially, nationally. It can be informal or it can be formal. And through collaboration, we build trust and stronger relationships, which positively impacts the people that we support within systems. It also provides the opportunities for greater structural or systemic change as we move forward in this work. So a really beautiful example that we got to experience recently is that Journey recently hosted a gathering for Atlantic service providers who are engaged in similar work. So community partners and colleagues from all 4 Atlantic provinces came together to share information, resources, knowledge, expertise, and insights. It was incredible. We felt mobilized and we walked away with new resources, ideas, and tangible ways to better support survivors of gender-based violence. I know that if I'm supporting someone who is now living in Prince Edward Island, I have people and programs that I can absolutely call and reach out to and connect with. Another framework for consideration that guides service delivery at the Journey Project is really about being survivor-centered. And a survivor-centered approach prioritizes the rights, safety, and well-being of the survivor while honoring their unique individuality and strengths. To be survivor or client-centered, we must acknowledge the multiple and intersecting identities of individuals. People who have experienced sexual violence, intimate partner violence, or family violence are often experiencing multiple oppressions and therefore have unique needs. Identities are related to systems of oppression or social structures of power and privilege. So for example, racism, colonialism, heterosexism, classism, and ableism. There can be no one-size-fits-all approach when supporting individuals who are impacted by gender-based violence. So for example, in Newfoundland and Labrador, we have a vast geography where there's a combination of urban cities, rural communities, and remote northern communities. The needs and experiences of a person or by someone who's living on the Northern Peninsula or on the north coast of Labrador may look vastly different than someone who is in the capital city of St. John's or someone who recently arrived in Canada. To be survivor-centered, we must recognize and amplify the strengths of people who face violence. People are equipped with incredible knowledge and expertise, and it's our role to amplify those strengths and collaborate with survivors to find out what works best for them. And so it's also notable that part of this kind of ongoing process for the Journey Project was an initial needs assessment and then continued evaluation and consultation with survivors and service providers throughout Newfoundland and Labrador and Canada more broadly. Oh, yes, okay. So in early 2022, the Journey Project hired an external consultant, Malin Enstrom, to conduct interviews and research with representatives of numerous transition shelters, women's centers, community organizations, and government agencies throughout Newfoundland and Labrador. During these interviews and conversations, some really common concerns and gaps in gender-based violence legal support in Newfoundland and Labrador were identified. So as an example, there's currently no centralization of information pertaining to information on IPV or sexual violence for survivors of GBV. There have been concerns raised of a general gap in IPV support networks throughout the province. And although there are several incredibly amazing programs and supports for victims and survivors throughout Newfoundland and Labrador, there is not a centralization of information, which can cause confusion in terms of where to turn for help or assistance. And so transparency and communication between agencies appears to be challenging, resulting in the victim or the survivor or the person not feeling supported enough or having that sense or that feeling of being lost in the system. Additionally, there's currently no standardized training model for IPV support workers in NL. Each agency and organization has their own introductory or onboarding system to new employees or to their current staff. So a standardized approach, for example, to create a confidential high-risk protocol to identify high-risk victims between agencies has been raised by several agencies. Victims and survivors continuously express concern over not being updated or in the know in a timely manner on the status of their criminal complaint, potential charges, court appearances, or court outcomes. And then when it comes to an understanding of criminal or family proceedings, what if you need assistance with both? There's often crossover, and survivors feel that this is confusing. There's been a request to increase understanding of what is criminal versus non-criminal behavior. What are the options when you don't qualify for legal aid? How do you fill out applications? What is included? And legal stakeholders need to have a better understanding of coercive control. Additionally, there was an identified need for family court liaison or court support navigators. Survivors have repeatedly expressed the need for increased support while going specifically through a family court process, and identified that a dedicated position would connect victims and survivors to inform them about updates on court statuses, and further empowerment and support for victims or survivors in court is needed. There was also identified that an immediate intake for IPV victims and survivors. Additionally, in Newfoundland and Labrador, there is currently no standardized approach for assisting support workers to help victims or survivors on how to fill out an emergency protection order throughout the province. It was identified that there's a general lack of confidence in filling out an EPO correctly, as well as knowledge in what happens after one is filled out. Victims and survivors are often in great distress when having to fill out an EPO and need a knowledgeable and confident support worker who will be able to assist them, inform them about the process, and help walk them through it. So victims and survivors would often like to know how to fill that out or have assistance in doing so, have an understanding how to fill it out, submit it, particularly when living in rural or remote areas where there is no courthouse, for example. Have the knowledge and be informed about what happens after it's been submitted, having an understanding of who attends court, who attends a hearing, and the court process in general. And so there are many things that are currently happening under the Journey umbrella that we are very excited about through our confirmed funding through Justice Canada for the next several years. So two of the biggest things that makes us, or one of the biggest things that makes us so excited at the Journey Project is since its inception, while we've always been provincially mandated, is that survivors and service providers have consistently noted that they needed staff on the ground in their regions. And so we recently hired 2 new legal support navigators, one on the west coast of Newfoundland and another person based in Happy Valley Goose Bay, Labrador, who are there specifically to recognize that the needs in rural and northern communities are very different from those in urban centers, and having individuals with specialized knowledge in a geographical context will better support people who are navigating legal systems. We are in the process of expanding our lawyer roster and excited to say that we have our first lawyer on the ground in Labrador. This is the first time that's happened in 5 years. And we are in the process of expanding our supports and service delivery models to many other survivors in the time to come. And so that concludes the presentation portion of us this evening. Before we move into our panel discussion, I want to thank you all again from the entire team of the Journey Project for having us here. And most importantly, I want to thank all of the survivors who have trusted us with their stories, with navigating their legal process, and have reached out to us for support. We get to learn and grow with and from you every single day. Thank you so much.
think you're muted, LA.
Okay, thank you, Carla. Thank you so much, Janet. It sounds like you're doing really fantastic work. Really, really interesting to hear of all the different stakeholders that are involved and how you're clearly very engaged in bringing silos down in order to provide the supports that are really necessary for people who have experienced intimate partner violence. Just before we switch to our panel, we do have a question in the Q&A, and that is this available for domestic violence survivors who have not experienced sexual abuse?
That is a great question. So we are in the process of expanding our service delivery model to include folks who haven't necessarily experienced sexualized violence. That formal kind of expansion has not happened yet. But what I will say is that if there is anyone on the call who is living in Newfoundland and Labrador or has connections to experiences in Newfoundland and Labrador, I would encourage them to absolutely reach out to us. If we're not quite in a position yet to offer supports and services, we plan to be extremely soon.
Excellent. And I suppose there's even the question of, if it is domestic violence, there could be a sexual component that isn't necessarily immediately obvious. So I guess probably you would agree that if in doubt, check it out, right?
100%. And, LA, you had highlighted about that we are very invested in community collaboration and consultations with service providers. And so one of the things that I think is really great about our team and the variety of backgrounds that we come from is that even if maybe we aren't the exact right people to connect with based on our eligibility, we usually have some knowledge on the team about who might be and direct contacts and warm transfers to offer folks.
Excellent. So I'd like to introduce our panel. We have three panelists from two different provinces. So we have Sarah Dennis, who is with us from the RISE program, and she's going to tell us a bit about that. And then we have Jen Richard and Janice Shoemaker, who are with us from Sexual Violence New Brunswick. And they're just at the beginning end of a 4-year pilot project that's going to be looking to create in New Brunswick something very similar to what Journey is doing in Newfoundland. So we're very excited to hear about that. So why don't we start with you, Sarah, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about RISE.
Thank you, LA. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. So the RISE program started in 2019. We received funding from Justice Canada to support survivors of workplace sexual harassment. And we created a project similar to the model that the Journey Project had already well established, and that we have a lawyer referral service for survivors of workplace sexual harassment. In 2020, the province of Prince Edward Island, the Department of Justice and Public Safety, provided us with funding to expand that scope and include any survivors of sexual violence to be included in that. So to be able to seek up to 4 hours of free legal advice with a trauma-informed lawyer, and then to create resources and publications for survivors experiencing sexual violence looking to navigate the legal system. In 2021, we received funding from Justice Canada to expand even further, and we were able to include support for people who've experienced intimate partner violence as well. And that has been, it's filled a major gap in the system. And we've, seen an incredible number of survivors through that program since we started seeing clients in early 2022. So we, it's a really fulsome project now, and that we can really support people experiencing gender-based violence, more broadly, and give them access to free legal advice, plain language legal information, and resources and connections to community supports that they need. Just like Janet and the Journey Project, we really do look at the whole client and, come from a client-centered approach, understanding that people's, legal problems don't exist in a vacuum. They're experiencing many layers of oppression and have intersecting needs. And so we really look at, getting to know the client and understanding what barriers they're experiencing to accessing justice, but also just living, full and happy lives. So we're really, really pleased to be able to really support people along the continuing of gender-based violence and being able to support, helping navigate those legal needs, but, understanding that there's a lot more underneath that. And we work with our community partners very closely to be able to refer and support people in a really holistic way.
Excellent. I have a multitude of questions. I'm just going to go to the
Sure.
Q&A first. So there's a question here. Do you include as potential outcomes offers of services any forms of mediation? And what about restorative justice processes? So maybe I'll just open that up to both Janet and Sarah, and then we'll shift over to hear from Jen and Jana, because I know you're just at the early stages of your project, right? So if you want to address the mediation restorative justice question, that's a very interesting one, and I know a bit of a complex question. So if either of you want to step up for that.
Sure. I can start, Janet, if you'd like. So certainly if a client identifies that they would like to go through an alternative model, certainly we would help them navigate through that. At this point, especially for sexual violence, our provincial restorative justice program is not accepting clients for sexual violence. Certainly there's support there for other forms of gender-based violence, but specifically sexual violence. It's a very new program. It only started, I think, in the last year and a half, and they're not ready to support clients with who've experienced sexual violence. But definitely, like, coming from, a client-centered approach, if we would talk about, what does justice mean to you, and that may come up, and we certainly would help people navigate through that if they would like to do that.
Excellent. And Janet, how about you?
Absolutely. And so Newfoundland and Labrador is certainly lacking in formalized restorative justice approaches or processes. We do have lawyers on our roster who have broadly signed up under alternative dispute resolution, whether that be mediation or other forms. One of the things that we might ask a survivor or someone who we've been connecting with through the program is, like, what does justice look like for you? So while it may not be a formalized mediation or a formalized restorative justice process through the province, one of the most common things that we hear back from folks is like, I just don't want this to happen to anyone else, or I want to tell my story. And then, of course, we know, depending on the particular legal context or the experience of the person, there might be challenges with that. There might be non-disclosure agreements or NDAs put in place on certain things. There might be publication bans on people's experiences. And so I know that this is a little bit of a digression, but what Journey can potentially help offer in terms of like alternative options is support and or access to legal advice around what survivors can do or not do, and how we can support them to do it in a way that is legal, that is fulfilling, that is empowering to them as individuals. And so I do certainly hope that Newfoundland and Labrador catches up to some other provinces in terms of restorative or transformative justice, but there aren't a lot of provincially formalized processes in place. And at this point in time, I can't necessarily speak to any specifics that might be happening in particular Indigenous governments or communities, but if that was a request that came in through our program, it is absolutely something that our legal support navigators would help folks look into, research, find information about, and make connections to.
Nice. Yeah, thank you. So before we do more questions, why don't we let Jen and Jana contribute and talk about their new project?
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
Okay. I'll just start because I'm not sure exactly who's in the room and where they're from, just talking a little bit about sexual violence New Brunswick, and then I'll talk about where we're at. So just briefly, Sexual Violence New Brunswick, we were the only sexual assault center in the province till about 5 or 6 years ago. And we've been existing since around 1975. So since that time, we started out as the Fredericton Sexual Assault Center, but as we continued, our expertise grew, we became a provincial organization. So we do direct service in the Fredericton region, but then we also do tons of stuff all around the province, including professional development. We work a lot with communities, we work a lot with campuses around the province. And we do quite a bit of work in the justice system. We've been training Crown prosecutors and police and victim services folks. So especially really since Jian Ghomeshi unfounded, our asks from the criminal justice system have been more and more. So coming to now, we were asked probably maybe a year and a bit ago now from the justice system or from the provincial government to submit a proposal to Justice Canada for developing an independent legal advice program, which I will now call ILA, Independent Legal Advice. And so we did. And because at the time, it should also be mentioned that we did do a jurisdictional scan, and New Brunswick was only one of 2 provinces who didn't have any type of independent legal advice for survivors of sexual violence. Usually New Brunswick is usually a little slow to get things up and running. So that was helpful for us to be able to say, like, we are behind, we need to get this happening. One of the things we wanted to add, though, because we've had a long relationship with the Newfoundland Sexual Assault Center and the Journey Project, and specifically Janet, was we did want to model whatever this program is going to be as closely as we could with the Journey Project. That is to say, yes, the legal advice, the access to that is crucial. We also want to add the other stuff, the emotional support, the legal navigation, the legal information. So we called our project the ILA Plus. So the plus being everything else. Who knows if it's going to be named something else, but that's what we're kind of going with right now. But it's all really inspired by how the Journey Project has rolled out and developed their program. So we are, like LA said, we are in the first year of a 4-year project. We do have 3 communities, 3 pilot sites that we're going to be starting to get moving soon. They just got their funding, they just got their checks in the mail, so that's a big piece of it done. But the pilot sites are going to be Fredericton, like the Fredericton region, the Moncton region, and the St. John region. And choosing those for a bunch of different reasons, but essentially those were the ones that were the most prepared. There's also a diversity in those communities as well. And we wanted some strong communities that we knew who would be able to start these, because our intent is going to be to expand this to the rest of the province sooner rather than later. So that is pretty much where we are at, I think, from my point of view. Do you want to talk about your perspective?
Sure. So I'm Jana Shoemaker. I'm the current project coordinator for ILA Plus with SVNB. So I'm becoming best friends with Janet to pull as much information out as I can as we start developing. So I'm here mainly so that people can see my face, so that when I come knocking on your door in the new year, you'll know what it's about, and that I will be looking for lawyers to work for a project, and I will be promoting the project for people who need this independent legal advice, because it is a genuine need and I'm excited to be part of filling that need within the province of New Brunswick. Before I turn the mic over back to LA, I did want to say, someone asked earlier about the alternative dispute considerations and what's encouraged through the project. Obviously, we don't have the nitty-gritty done with SVNB yet. It will be, but I would note that our trauma-informed training for the lawyers who will be partnering with us to do this work does include a discussion about alternative dispute resolution and being cognizant that that might be the best route for the client based on where they are in their journey. So we are live to that issue. It's an important tool for lawyers to have in their arsenal. So I will turn it back over to LA.
Thanks. That's exciting to hear. I know our province is just in early stages of developing restorative justice, and what they've done so far does not include domestic violence, because, you know, as we all know, that's a very tricky place in terms of power dynamics and imbalances. But the notion that there's kind of a possibility of kind of moving to something holistic that could be better for survivors is great. A great idea. Thank you. I'm going to go to the Q&A now because we have some more questions. So we have a question here that's by Kim-Lee Wong. Family courts are traumatizing and unaffordable to most survivors. Do you support abolishing family court in favor of a survivor-centered Indigenous influence process for family separation? That's a kind of a big question. I'm not sure how you might want to field that, but anybody that would like to respond to that is welcome too.
I can start on that one, and that is a big question, and thank you so much, Kim-Lee, for asking it. I think the way that I personally, maybe even professionally, view the legal systems is that there should always be choice. There should always be options for survivors. They should always be survivor-centered, specifically for Indigenous folks or communities. Or anyone of diverse backgrounds. They should be culturally sensitive. They should be culturally appropriate. They should have cultural supports in place. So I do believe in that. And I also believe that the systems that currently exist need to do and be better. So in the context of the Journey Project, what I would hope that, like, as we move kind of forward with the work that we are doing and the bigger picture advocacy that I think a lot of the groups, you know, whether it's SVNB or RISE or our parent organizations, PLEAN and the Sexual Assault Center are doing, really is around recognizing that both paths can exist. Multiple paths maybe can and should exist, so that for folks, say, who want to navigate a federally or provincially regulated legal system, have the option to do that. And for folks who should have access to a survivor-centered or Indigenous influenced process for family separation, for kinship agreements, etc., should also be able to do or access that. And so it's a bit of a both and, but I do really appreciate your question, Kim-Lee.
Thanks so much, Janet. Did any of our other panelists want to weigh in on that one, or?
I would just say that I'm, Prince Edward Island is kind of at a point where I feel that within the traditional legal system, they're really starting to look at what else can we do in order, taking accountability for harms that may have been caused within the traditional legal system, and how can we do better. I do feel that there is a lot of reflection going on there, and thinking about how can we move to a place where we are more survivor-centered, more, being less harmful. The restorative justice program within the provincial system is going to expand. I really do feel that that will begin to include survivors of gender-based violence in a more holistic way. And they have announced that there is a therapeutic court for domestic violence that will start sometime next year. So there are things on Prince Edward Island that I do feel are starting to really evolve in terms of the traditional legal system. And then there's always room for non-traditional systems that address harm to be created. And I hope to see that in the future.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Another question. So this is Caitlin. I've experienced all forms of IPV, including sexual, and I'm told not to file a historic IPV report because I could lose custody of my child who's also being abused, which hangs in the balance. Wow, that is such a heartbreaking question. And I assume the question is just sort of generally, what is your response to that? I'll just, before I turn it over, say, you know, as a family law lawyer, I feel you. I really do. Sometimes bringing in allegations of intimate partner violence ends up backfiring, and you're seen as the difficult parent. And I've had cases that went that route, and it is just heartbreaking. And I guess I in New Brunswick would like to just echo a little bit of what Sarah said, which is that I am beginning to see some shifts in understanding within the judiciary. So there does seem to be some movement there, but I really feel you. But anybody else who would like to respond to that comment?
I want to say first and foremost, Caitlin, thank you so much for sharing a small part of what I am sure is a very long and very hard story. I hope that, you know, regardless of where you are in the country, whether that's in one of the Atlantic provinces or somewhere else rather, that you have someone that you feel safe reaching out to, that you trust, that you can get connected with and offer support for both you and your child. If you're not in Newfoundland and Labrador, and if you aren't in, you know, PEI or in New Brunswick, and you want support in researching that, figuring that out, or getting connected to folks in your region, I don't want you to hesitate to reach out to me at the Journey Project, and I will absolutely do my best to support you. Without, you know, I'm not a lawyer myself, and I certainly can't advise based on any sort of, well, I can't advise generally, but, you know, definitely not on limited information. But I don't want you to hesitate to give us a call at 709-722-2805 and see if we can't get you connected to someone who can offer kind of really individualized and direct support to you about your particular situation. And if you're currently not in a safe space, contemplating or thinking about if there's a transition house or a anti-violence organization in your community or in your region that you can get connected to. And if there's any immediate danger, then reaching out to some emergency supports for sure.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. She actually did have a question there, which is, do I risk losing custody if I move forward with my report? And I guess, Caitlin, I don't know where you are. If you are in the Fredericton area, the Fredericton Legal Advice Clinic, which would be a good place to go because you could speak to a lawyer there. And I think that's a really important question, and one that a lawyer could definitely help you with if you wanted to just get some consultation and some guidance in that regard.
I'll
So
just echo if
sure, yeah.
sorry, LA. I'll just echo if you are in PEI, our independent legal advice for IPV is already rolling. So individualized family law or criminal advice can be accessed through our program. So you can connect with us at 902-218-6143 if you need support in PEI.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We have a really encouraging comment here by Jeanette, who is in northern Manitoba. She says that they have a domestic violence treatment court process, and it works amazingly well. And some offenders have even expressed gratitude that they were charged. It's labor intensive with deep therapeutic support, and the participants at the end attend a community circle to speak with the person, to ask questions, and so show support. So that's, again, more of a restorative justice approach, it sounds like. She says, I'd be happy to speak with anyone there if you wish to hear about our experience. And then adds, unfortunately, they lost funding, which is too common a story. But Jeanette's offered her telephone number, so I'm just going to put that out there. It's area code 204-679-5696. And thank you so much for sharing that, Jeanette, because that is a very encouraging story. I do know in New Brunswick, we have a domestic violence court in Moncton, but my understanding is that it's simply a provincial court system. It just takes the domestic violent cases and channels them, but there's no value added. So it sounds like what you guys have been doing has been quite a bit different than that.
There is a similar pilot, not necessarily exactly similar, but there is a family violence intervention court, which was piloted in Stephenville, which is on the west coast of Newfoundland, and is in the process of expanding. So we are hopeful about the potential interventions that can be offered, as that will be a specialized criminal court for navigating instances of family violence. So we are hopeful. Again, it is within the same kind of potentially problematic patriarchal Eurocentric system as the criminal legal system, but hopeful that that can offer more specific supports that decrease recidivism and decrease that kind of cycle of violence that we see showing up in cases of IPV and family violence more broadly.
Okay. I was asked to put the phone number in the chat, so I don't think I can do it in the Q&A, but I'm going to try to just put that into the chat so people could access it there. So, so we have just some more comments that people have shared, and it would seem that in Manitoba, there's within Indigenous communities, there's been some positive restorative justice efforts made, but not always so much within the court system. Okay, so I think that's probably it for our Q&A. I'm wondering if there's any remaining comments that you would like to share. We have a few more minutes.
I think one of the things, Ellie, just building on what you said, that comes to mind for me is that under the umbrella of the Journey Project, we absolutely support people navigating legal systems. That is our focus. That is what we are funded to do. And it's incredible and inspiring to hear how often survivors and folks who have experienced different forms of gender-based violence push back against the system, push back against the oppression, push back against the violence that they have experienced. And so while many folks may not receive or get their version or their definition of justice through the systems that are set up, survivors and folks who've experienced forms of gender-based violence do and say and act through and offer services of support and strength and brilliance every single day. And so I think that sometimes it can feel really unhopeful. And I know for myself, sometimes it can feel unhopeful when we're thinking about how broken the systems are, when we're hearing stories about people being afraid to reach out for help or support because they fear what's going to happen to their children when they're just trying to protect them, for being shamed or stigmatized for their stories or their experiences, or for having been told that it was their fault for something that has been done to them or harm that's happened to them. And I think that the other thing that we also sometimes get to hear as we connect with survivors and remain connected to survivors through our program is also that there are some great parents who are connecting with us. There are beautiful artists, there are talented writers, There are community service workers who do this work as they're navigating these experiences. And there are people who get out of bed most days, and every single one of those things and experiences should be celebrated, despite what the system sometimes does to people. And so I think that, you know, on the days that the system is failing us and that we are feeling overwhelmed by it, I don't want us to lose sight of those little glimmers that are actually really big fireworks when you think about the incredible strength that survivors show every single day.
Thank you for that, Janet. I couldn't agree more. And I guess just to kind of echo that, the court system by its very nature is intimidating. Just walking into the building for anybody is intimidating. Walking into that building, knowing that your abuser is going to be there, knowing that allegations are going to be thrown at you, knowing that you are going to experience varying levels of humiliation in that whole process. It boggles the mind that anyone has the courage really to step up and go through that. And it to say it's not user friendly is a huge understatement. So the sentiment of abolishing it, I can understand where that's coming from. But I think the things that can really make a difference is the work that you're doing. If we had court workers who are available in every case to be there as a presence and a guide, that kind of thing. So I'm just so grateful for the work you're doing in your provinces, and really excited to hear about what's going to be happening with Sexual Violence New Brunswick and the ILA Plus program. So Carla, I see you're here. Did you have any comments or thoughts you wanted to contribute?
I guess I wondered what the uptake is like in terms of getting lawyers, in terms of building that roster, and is it sort of yeah, so what are the obstacles to that? Is it sort of, you get a couple of them and the word spreads, so what's that been like in terms of bringing in the practitioner?
I can answer first from the RISE program perspective. It actually was the recruitment process is, I would feel it's from the Prince Edward Island perspective, people were quite keen to join. And we've been able to retain most of our lawyers. We're quite flexible. We work with the lawyers to say, if there's a month where you're going to be in trial and you can't take on as many clients, you just let us know. And we have a very good working relationship with our lawyers. I will say that responsiveness was a bit of an issue at the beginning, and in terms of getting back to us and doing conflict of interest checks, and kind of that timeliness, which we know is so important to our clients, booking appointments, that sort of thing. We did increase how much we pay our lawyers a little bit, and that did help. And then just in terms of we have retained a lot of the same lawyers from the beginning of the project, and we're starting to really have a long-term relationship. So the timeliness has also in their responses and booking appointments has also kind of just shifted in terms of they're more comfortable with our program, and over time that relationship is just strengthened. We also provide 2 trainings, trauma-informed lawyering with Dr. Lori Haskell and Dania O'Malley from Family Violence Prevention Services and PEI offers a specific training for our lawyers who focus on family law for IPV, and that's about trauma and family violence. So those 2 trainings that we offer quarterly, our Law Society of PEI offers continuing education credits for attending those, and that has been really helpful in terms of the buy-in for lawyers and community stakeholders to take those trainings. I hope that answered your question.
We have a comment here by Sophie, who's in BC, and it looks like they're developing a restorative justice process tailored to meet the needs of survivors of sexualized violence, and it's showing positive outcomes in terms of shifting things for offenders. That's huge. That's such a valuable thing, because if you have offenders beginning to have compassion and understanding over their behavior, that's really big. So thank you, Sophie, for sharing that. That's a very positive note. Well, we do have a little bit of time, but if there aren't any more questions, we could end early. So does anybody have anything they'd like to contribute?
I'd just like to make a comment that we have the evaluation link for this evening's webinar available in the chat box. So if you'd like to take a moment before you do leave, we'd love to have your input on what you thought of tonight's webinar. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Sheila.
And I would just like to thank everyone who asked questions and made comments. As someone who's spearheading a new program, it's really helpful to hear what you're thinking and what you're concerned about. And Sophie, I'm going to be digging into the BC program as soon as I log off. But also thanks to everyone else here. It's good for me to meet new faces and to always stay in close contact with the Journey Project, because you're quite an inspiration for us here in New Brunswick. So thanks to everyone.
Absolutely. And Sophie, I don't know if you could put into the chat, or if you're still there, any kind of URL for the program you're talking about. But if not, feel free to contact me or contact Sexual Violence New Brunswick, so that Jana can get some more information on that. Well, thank you so much, everybody who attended, and thank you, panelists. It was very informative, and we're very excited that some of these initiatives are happening for survivors. So, all right, we'll say good night.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks so much.